So, what would it actually look like if the US military launched an operation to capture a head of state? Well, the source material we're breaking down today lays out a pretty dramatic hypothetical scenario, and we're about to get into every single detail of this high stakes gambit. Okay, first things first, and this is super important. Everything we're about to walk through is a fictional what if. It's a scenario set a little bit in the future in January 2026. You should think of it as a thought experiment, really, one that's designed to explore some very, very real world tensions. All right, let's dive in. The mission has a code name Operation Absolute Resolve, and it all kicks off with a shocking military raid in the middle of the night. The sheer speed and coordination described here are just wild. The whole thing starts with a cyber attack that plunges Caracas into total darkness. Under that cover, Delta Force commandos rappel onto President Maduro's roof. They blast their way inside and, get this, they capture him in under 5 minutes. A swift, high-tech, and incredibly bold move. And this quote from the source material really drives home how surreal the whole event is. The fictional US president is watching the entire raid unfold on a live feed, and he describes it not as a military operation, but like he was watching a TV show. You know, that detached perspective is a really key part of this whole narrative. So, after that dramatic opening, the whole world is left reeling, asking two really big questions. And these are the questions that are going to frame the rest of our breakdown. First, why? What could possibly justify kidnapping the leader of a sovereign nation? And second, what happens to the rest of the world if this kind of thing becomes the new normal? To answer that first question, the why, the source gives us two very different motives. We're going to start with the official story, the one that's given to the public. The official justification is all built around this legal indictment. The charge? Narco-terrorism. The claim is that Maduro's government has been actively helping cartels flood the United States with cocaine for decades. So this isn't an act of war, you see. It's a law enforcement action. But the source material immediately pushes us to look a little closer. It asks a really critical question. When you actually look at the data, does this drug trafficking explanation really hold up as the main reason for such an extreme operation? And this is where it gets really interesting. According to the source, if the goal was to stop cocaine, Venezuela seems like a kind of an odd target. I mean, this data shows Guatemala exporting many, many times more cocaine than Venezuela. So the big question is, why target the smaller player? And to add another layer to that, the source points out that the deadliest drug in America isn't even cocaine from Venezuela, it's fentanyl, and that comes mainly from Mexico. So this fact makes the official story even more complicated, and it really pushes us to look for another reason. And that brings us to the second motive presented in the source, the one it argues is the real reason, a resource that's way more valuable and strategically important than cocaine. Just take a look at this chart. This right here is the heart of the matter. Venezuela is sitting on the largest proven crude oil reserves on the entire planet. We're talking more than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran. And that one single fact changes the whole strategic aim. Now, this isn't some new issue. As this timeline shows, the tension over who controls that oil has been building up for decades. It started with US companies pretty much dominating the industry. Then it shifted when Venezuela created its own state oil company, and it really hit a breaking point when President Chavez nationalized all the oil reserves, which basically kicked US companies out. And according to the source, this quote reveals the real mindset behind the hypothetical raid. The fictional Trump doesn't see nationalization as a country's sovereign right. No, he sees it as Venezuela stealing oil that he believes belonged to American companies. That perspective, the source argues, is the key to the entire operation. So, if the motive was really oil, what about the legality of it all? Well, the source is pretty clear on this. It argues the operation breaks both American and international law. Let's break this down. On the one hand, you've got the US constitutional issue. A president can't just declare war without congressional approval, and in this scenario, that was never sought. Then, on the other hand, you have the international issue. The UN Charter explicitly forbids one nation from using military force against another's sovereignty. The source says this operation violates both. And the reaction was, well, swift and severe. The source details immediate condemnation, and not just from adversaries like Russia and China, but from regional neighbors and even traditional allies all across Latin America and Europe. This was not a popular move. It was seen as a really dangerous escalation. And all of this brings us to our final, and maybe most important point, the long-term consequences of an action like this. What kind of world does it create? The source gives it a name, New Age colonialism. And the idea is that it's the same old story, a powerful nation taking resources from a weaker one, but it's just dressed up in a new justification. In this case, a war on drugs, instead of, say, a civilizing mission. And so we end here, with the central question this whole hypothetical scenario is designed to make us ask. If the most powerful country on Earth can just decide on its own to go kidnap another nation's leader to secure resources, what stops other powerful nations from doing the exact same thing? It's a chilling thought, for sure, about the future of international order and the very idea of national sovereignty.